My son whispered at dinner, "Auntie sleeps in Daddy's bed when you travel." 10 words, just 10. But they rang out like a silent explosion inside my chest, as if someone had ripped the ground from beneath my feet without warning. The sound of silverware against porcelain stopped in midair, suspended in an eternity of seconds. Steam from the rice rose slowly, drawing ghostly shapes that dissolved before reaching the ceiling. I felt time split in half. There was a before and an after those words, and I knew I would never be who I was 5 minutes ago. I smiled. I fake well. I've always faked. I spent my entire life pretending everything was fine, that I was strong enough, that I could carry everything alone. And in that instant, with my 6-year-old son looking at me with those innocent, trusting eyes, I knew that smiling was the only way not to collapse in front of him, not to let him see his mother shattering into 1,000 pieces right there at the dinner table. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you've ever felt this pain, the pain of discovering your life was a lie, that the person you trusted most betrayed you in the cruelest way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I want more people to know they're not alone in this. I want you to feel there's someone here who understands, who went through this and survived. Because believe me, we survive, and we don't just survive, we're reborn. But in that moment, sitting at that table, I didn't know that yet. The apartment in Incheon smelled of fish soup and tired memories. It was a scent that had accompanied me since we moved there, right after the wedding. That aroma of home-cooked food mixed with sea salt that came through the open window, carried by the cold coastal wind. The lights in the buildings blinked outside, thousands of illuminated windows where other families dined, laughed, lived their apparently perfect lives. And life went on, indifferent to my pain, to my world that had just collapsed. Children played on the playground below, their cheerful screams rising to our 10th floor like echoes of a happiness I could no longer feel. The sky was getting dark, that deep blue tone that precedes complete night. Stars began to appear timidly, one by one, and I wondered if someone out there, looking at those same stars, was also having their world shattered at that exact moment. Seung-ho and I had been married for 8 years. 8 years that, in that moment, seemed like an eternity of carefully constructed illusions. He was an English teacher at a prestigious international school, gentle and absent at the same time, a contradiction I had learned to accept as part of who he was, like a tolerable flaw. Seung-ho had that calm way about him, that soft, controlled voice that calmed rebellious teenage students and made me believe everything would be fine, always, no matter what happened. But the truth is, he was absent too much. Constant trips to international educational conferences, pedagogical update courses in Seoul, methodological workshops in Busan, seminars in Daegu. Sometimes he spent entire weeks away, and I became a true specialist in waiting, in freezing my life until he returned. I waited for him, always, patiently. With dinner ready at the exact time he walked through the door, with the house impeccably clean and organized, with the automatic smile on my face, even when immense fatigue weighed on my shoulders like giant stones. Hope came folded in the cloth napkin, that foolish, childish hope that this time he would stay home longer, that we would talk deeply like before marriage, that he would look at me again with that passionate sparkle in his eyes that once existed and made me feel special. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which theoretically allowed me to stay home with June and have flexibility, but it also meant my days dangerously mixed into an infinite, suffocating routine of work on tight deadlines, endless care of the house, constant care of the small, demanding child, anguished waiting. I remember the day we met as if it were yesterday, every detail preserved with photographic clarity and memory. It was radiant spring, and the cherry blossoms were magnificently blooming in Yui Park, creating a pink tunnel of delicate petals. I was only 23 years old, had just graduated from design at the prestigious Hongik University with honors, and the world seemed full of infinite possibilities, stretching before me like an ocean without limits. He was sitting alone on a wooden bench worn by time and use, reading a thick book in English intently, The Great Gatsby. I remember to this day the faded, yellowed blue cover and the pages with notes in the margins. Our eyes met by pure chance when I picked up my bag that had fallen noisily on the stone floor with a dull thud, scattering the contents, and he immediately got up to help, and then he smiled. That shy, genuine smile, crooked in a charming way, that made me feel intense butterflies in my stomach for the first time in my life. We talked for hours on end without stopping about classic and contemporary books, about impossible dreams we secretly kept in our hearts, about how we wanted to live our lives with purpose and meaning, about the future that seemed so bright and full of golden promises. He said passionately that he wanted to change the entire world through transformative education, deeply touching the lives of vulnerable young students and shaping future generations. I said emotionally that I wanted to create genuinely beautiful things that touched people's hearts and made them feel something deep and true, something that transcended the material. We seemed absolutely perfect for each other in that magical moment, like rare puzzle pieces that fit perfectly without any effort, naturally and inevitably. Our dating was intense and completely passionate from the first kiss. He constantly took me to hidden, charming cafes in Hongdae, those small, cozy places that only true locals know, and that are on narrow, winding alleys, where we drank sophisticated iced coffee in transparent glass cups and talked animatedly about the bright future until the sun slowly set, painting the metropolitan sky intense orange, delicate pink, and deep purple. He proudly introduced me to his family on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the extremely kind maternal mother who obsessively cooked too much whenever I visited their house, generously filling the huge table with elaborate, delicious traditional Korean dishes, the serious and reserved but fundamentally fair father who worked diligently at a conservative bank for over 30 years without missing a day, and Jiwon, the lively younger sister who at the time was only 18 years old and enthusiastically studied fashion at the prestigious Ua University. She hugged me warmly at that first nervous meeting, tight and prolonged like blood sisters hug, said animatedly that she had always desperately wanted an older sister to talk intimately about girl things, about fashionable clothes and makeup and secret dreams of youth. I felt instantly welcomed into that family, part of something bigger and more meaningful, of a true family united by strong bonds. When Sung-ho solemnly asked for my hand in marriage just 6 months after we met, on an orange, absolutely dramatic sunset at Namsan Tower, with the entire gigantic city at our feet and millions of lights beginning to blink simultaneously, creating a luminous sea, I didn't hesitate for a single second. Of course I said yes emphatically. I loved him. I loved him truly and deeply, with all the overwhelming intensity that an idealistic 24-year-old young woman can love, with that innocent, completely silly certainty that romantic love conquers absolutely everything and overcomes all obstacles. The wedding was simple, but genuinely beautiful, in a carefully planned traditional ceremony that harmoniously mixed the old and the new, the modern and the ancestral, faithfully respecting millenary Korean traditions, while adding contemporary, personal touches. I wore an immaculate white handbook meticulously embroidered by hand with delicate, detailed cherry blossoms, each petal a work of art. He wore an elegant charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored by an expensive tailor. The professional photos show 2 radiant, smiling young people, faces illuminated by genuine happiness, full of naive hope and grandiose plans for future decades. When I look at those photos now, carefully stored in a dusty box at the back of the closet, because I can no longer bear to see them displayed on the living room shelf for visitors to see, I see a girl who knew absolutely nothing of what was inevitably to come. A girl who believed firmly and naively in perfect happy endings like in the romantic Korean dramas we watched together comfortably on rainy winter Sundays. The first years were genuinely and objectively good. Not perfect. No human marriage is. No real relationship is. But good enough for us to be happy most of the time. We lived in a small, modest apartment in Boshin, only 40 cramped square meters, but it was ours, and that was amply enough for our simple happiness. I personally decorated every tiny corner with infinite love and almost obsessive care. I planted colorful, fragrant flowers on the tiny balcony, vibrant, resilient red geraniums, and delicate white jasmines that intensely perfumed the warm, humid summer nights when the breeze blew gently, bringing relief from the heat. I carefully painted the walls in soft, comforting colors that calmed the agitated mind and created atmosphere, created a truly welcoming home with my own hands and honest sweat. Sung-ho worked a lot, more than I personally thought necessary or healthy, left extremely early when the sun had barely shyly risen, and invariably returned late when it was completely dark, but crucially he always came home. Always. That deeply comforted me and gave me security. We dined together at the table, even if late and already mutually exhausted from the day's demands. We watched exciting Korean dramas huddled together on the small, worn 2-seater sofa, sincerely laughing and crying along with the fictional characters. We made love with the natural, healthy frequency and characteristic intensity of passionate newlyweds, laughing embarrassed when the old, cheap mattress squeaked scandalously too loud and we worried that the close neighbors on the thin wall would hear everything. When I surprisingly discovered I was pregnant with June after 2 years of marriage and attempts, we cried together with pure, overflowing joy we couldn't contain. He placed his big, warm hand on my still completely flat, smooth belly, still showing absolutely no visible sign of life miraculously growing inside like magic, and solemnly promised with tears in his eyes to be the best father in the entire world. And I completely believed him. How I blindly believed in absolutely every word that came out of his mouth. And he was objectively a good, dedicated father, at least in the beginning of the crucial first years. He was physically present at every ultrasound without exception, firmly holding my trembling hand with comforting strength when we watched in wonder that tiny, pulsating dot on the foggy monitor that would miraculously become our beloved son. He assembled the solid wood crib with his own hands without asking anyone for help, even without any knack for practical manual work, reading the confusing, poorly translated manual at least 3 times, and cursing softly frustrated when the stubborn pieces didn't fit right. He meticulously painted the tiny baby's room in soft, relaxing light blue, with fluffy white clouds, carefully painted on the ceiling using a fine brush, a meticulous artistic work of several consecutive days. When June was finally born after 12 long, exhausting hours of intense labor that left me completely exhausted, but simultaneously euphoric with hormones, Sung-ho held that tiny, extremely fragile little being with such extreme, reverent care that he seemed to be holding the entire universe and all the stars in his visibly trembling hands. His eyes shone intensely with emotional tears that refused to fall. "He is absolutely perfect in every way," he whispered with his voice deeply choked with genuine emotion. "You are perfect. Our little family is perfect and complete." But perfection, I discovered painfully years later through cruel experience, is an extremely fragile, temporary illusion that completely breaks and shatters at the slightest inevitable touch of the hard, cruel reality we all face. The changes were subtle and gradual at first, so subtle and imperceptible that I didn't even consciously notice when they actually began to corrode our marriage. First, work trips inexplicably multiplied. A single conference per month became 2 without adequate explanation. 2 quickly became 3, and then 4. Then he consistently began to work until much later, with increasingly alarming frequency, arriving home only when June was already sleeping deeply in his room, when I was already physically and emotionally too tired to talk about anything meaningful. Dinners together at the table progressively and worryingly became rare until they almost disappeared from routine. Long, intimate conversations about the day and feelings drastically shortened until they became meaningless monosyllables. Sex dangerously spaced out, once a week, then every 2 weeks, then only occasionally when he initiated something, always fast and purely mechanical, always in complete darkness without candles, always without that deep emotional connection and that true, vulnerable intimacy we naturally had before. I blamed myself constantly and obsessively. Of course I blamed myself, as the overwhelming majority of betrayed women invariably do culturally. I had gained considerable weight after the difficult pregnancy. 8 stubborn kilos I couldn't lose no matter what, no matter how desperately I tried with restrictive diets and exhausting physical exercises. My body had changed visibly and permanently. It had inevitable marks of motherhood engraved on the skin as constant reminders. Silver stretch marks, flabby belly, sagging breasts. Maybe I was no longer physically attractive and desirable to him. Maybe he had gotten tired of me, my imperfect body, my constant, predictable presence. Maybe I should have tried harder, dressed better with makeup, been more interesting and fun and spontaneous like before, more seductive and sexy, more adventurous in bed, more absolutely everything. The endless list of should have been more was infinite and mentally consumed me every day. On the days he traveled far away, and they became increasingly frequent and significantly prolonged, until eventually it seemed he spent significantly more time away from home than in it with us. My sister-in-law, Ji-won, sometimes stayed with us in the apartment to keep me company. She would proactively call with that sweet, helpful voice saying she wanted to keep me company, that I shouldn't be alone and isolated with a small, demanding, difficult child, that we were a united family, and family always helps each other unconditionally. I genuinely found the visible affection between them touching and moving, between Sung-ho and the protected younger sister. That natural complicity of siblings raised together in the same house, sharing childhood secrets and funny family stories. She would smile, that wide, luminous smile that lit up her delicate, symmetrical face, bringing extremely expensive, imported fruits from the traditional Namdaemun market. Big, perfectly ripe peaches, giant, incredibly sweet strawberries, red, juicy watermelons. She would repeatedly say with concern that I worked too much and sacrificed myself, that I visibly looked tired and prematurely aged, that I urgently needed to take better care of myself and prioritize my well-being. "You're so tired and exhausted, Iani," she would say, using the respectful term of address for older sister that ironically made me feel older and worn out than I chronologically was. "Let me take care of absolutely everything today. You rest completely and relax without guilt." Jiwon had divorced exactly 2 years ago, an extremely impulsive whirlwind marriage that lasted only 8 short, turbulent months with an older, successful businessman she casually met in a modern bar in Itaewon during a night of drinking. She never talked much about that period. The subject was clearly emotionally painful. She only said briefly and vaguely that it had been a gigantic, humiliating mistake, that she had married too young and extremely emotionally immature, that he was dangerously controlling and pathologically jealous to the extreme. She returned ashamed to live dependently with her conservative, judgmental parents in the big house in Bundang, but surprisingly spent a lot of time in our small, cramped house. 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week she was physically there. She played animatedly with June in the children's playground. He absolutely adored her without reservation, affectionately called her pretty, cool aunt who brings candy. She cooked elaborate, complex dishes I never had the patience or energy to make after an exhausting day of work. She obsessively cleaned the entire house without me even asking or subtly suggesting, methodically reorganized the always messy closet, changed old towels for new ones she brought. I felt deeply and genuinely grateful for the constant help. I sincerely thought I was very lucky to have a sister-in-law so present, so caring and attentive, so helpful and generous with her time. What busy, overloaded woman wouldn't like constant, completely free help? I never imagined the devastating truth. Or maybe I vaguely imagined it in the dark depths of my subconscious mind, but categorically and defensively refused to see and consciously accept, because consciously admitting that something was deeply and fundamentally wrong would be admitting that my apparently perfect, enviable life was a complete, pathetic farce, that my marriage was silently and inexorably crumbling brick by brick, and I definitely wasn't emotionally ready for that. I wasn't psychologically prepared to face the brutal, destroying truth. There were glaring signs, of course. There always are when we pay attention. It's just that we deliberately and consciously don't want to see the obvious that's right in our face. The way he systematically and consistently averted his gaze when I innocently asked about his day, as if he couldn't look me directly in the eyes without feeling guilt. How the new, expensive cell phone strategically lived screen down on any surface where he carelessly placed it. How he began to take visibly longer, more thorough showers when he came home from long trips, 15, 20, sometimes up to 30 minutes under running hot water, as if he desperately needed to wash something invisible but persistent from his contaminated skin, some heavy guilt I couldn't see, but he clearly felt burning intensely. How work trips became absurdly more frequent and significantly longer, always with apparently plausible, convincing excuses when questioned. How when I tried to kiss him romantically or initiate some physical intimacy, he would subtly but consistently turn his face away, saying he was too tired from hard work, with a throbbing headache, with urgent pending work. He absolutely had to finish that night. But we consciously ignore, don't we? We actively choose to ignore the signs, because accepting the painful truth hurts infinitely more than living comfortably and safely in the nebulous, protective uncertainty, or at least that's what I naively thought at the time. We create elaborate rational excuses, convincing logical justifications for suspicious behaviors. He's just temporarily stressed with heavy, demanding work. The perfectionist principle is demanding too many impossible results. It's stressful final exam season. He has to grade huge piles of students' handwritten tests and prepare reports. It's perfectly normal and statistically common for marriage to cool down a bit after a few years together monotonously, especially after a small, demanding child. I would repeat these comforting, reassuring phrases to myself like a constant, necessary, protective mantra, as if insistently repeating was enough to make them absolute, unquestionable truth, to magically make the inconvenient, threatening reality bend to my desperate, childish will. There was a specific, striking moment, about 3 months before that fateful dinner night, when I almost discovered everything prematurely. He had carelessly left his personal notebook open and on at the kitchen table, something he absolutely never, ever did. He was extremely and paranoidly careful and obsessive about technology and digital privacy, always meticulously closing and locking everything with complex passwords. I was routinely making simple breakfast when I saw a bright notification appear conspicuously on the screen, that small pop-up in the lower right corner. A short, intimate message. I missed last night. When are you coming back to me? With a pulsing red heart emoji at the end, from a contact mysteriously saved only as J, just the capital letter J alone, nothing more identifying. My heart violently and painfully raced in my tight chest, that horrible, nauseating sensation of free fall without a parachute. I carefully picked up the notebook with visibly trembling, sweaty hands, about to open the revealing complete conversation, about to discover everything right there in that moment, about to have my known world irreversibly destroyed. But then I clearly heard the shower abruptly turn off in the nearby bathroom, the characteristic, unmistakable sound of the plastic curtain being noisily pulled, and paralyzing fear completely froze me in place. Fear of what, exactly? Of confirming something absolutely horrible and destroying, of irreversibly and violently exploding our family, of being right about something devastating and terminal, of finally having to make extremely difficult, painful decisions that would change everything. I quickly closed the notebook, almost slamming the lid with unnecessary force, and mechanically, robotically went back to making coffee, with my hands trembling so uncontrollably that I spilled dangerously, boiling water on the hard ceramic floor, superficially but painfully burning my right foot. On that revealing, definitively transformative night, after June fell deeply and peacefully asleep, and thank heavens he fell asleep quickly, completely exhausted from playing energetically on the playground for hours under the hot sun, I sat completely motionless on the cold, hard floor of his room, in absolute, heavy silence that physically pressed on my ears. The nightlight projected artificial stars on the ceiling, those cheap fluorescent plastic little stars that glowed softly in the dark, and that he loved to patiently count one by one before sleeping, a sacred tradition of ours. My heart beat uncontrollably too high, too fast, so high and so fast that I could clearly hear the pulse rhythmically and painfully pulsing in my sensitive temples, in my tight throat, in my wrists. His 10 fateful words echoed persistently and torturingly like a broken, distorted melody that played in an infinite, inescapable loop inside my confused, tormented head. Auntie sleeps in Daddy's bed when you travel. It was his sweet, innocent voice, completely pure and without malice, without conscious intention to hurt or destroy, just objectively and honestly reporting a repeatedly observed fact, like someone casually saying they saw a colorful bird in the park or ate delicious ice cream with their loving grandmother during a walk. I stared fixedly, and without blinking at the large window of June's room. Outside, the strong autumn wind violently and mercilessly pushed the dry brown leaves with growing, threatening force, and they insistently beat against the glass like an urgent, desperate warning, as if nature itself was fervently trying to tell me something crucial and important that I stubbornly and obstinately refused to hear for months, maybe even entire years. The tall trees in the condominium swayed violently from side to side dangerously, frighteningly bending but not completely breaking yet, and I clearly saw myself symbolically reflected in them, firm, deep roots in the hard ground, but branches being mercilessly and cruelly punished by the approaching, threatening emotional storm. I knew, deep in the dark depths where inconvenient, painful truths dwell silently and wait patiently, that something fundamental inside me had cracked irreparably and permanently, a deep, irreversible fissure, like fine, delicate porcelain falling on the hard marble floor and shattering. But I still didn't have enough courage to honestly and directly look at the complete damage. I still wasn't emotionally ready to see and accept the real, frightening size of the hole that those 10 apparently innocent words had painfully opened in my chest, in my marriage, in my entire life carefully constructed over years. I spent the entire night in absolute torturous wakefulness, lying rigidly like a statue in the big bed we shared, that expensive, comfortable king-size bed we bought with such pride on our 3rd happy, hopeful anniversary, staring fixedly at the smooth white ceiling without seeing anything, mentally counting invisible cracks only I saw, feeling the mattress sink slightly on my side while his remained completely untouched, frighteningly empty, terribly cold. He would only return in 2 full days. He was supposedly in Daegu for a complete 3-day educational seminar, or at least that's what he had convincingly and confidently said. 2 full agonizing days for me to tormentedly decide exactly what to do. 2 days to gather courage or to pathetically convince myself that it was all a big, elaborate, innocent misunderstanding, that June had completely misunderstood the observed situation, that small children frequently confuse things and mix objective reality with fertile imagination and fantasies. But I knew the truth deep down, in that dark, frozen place where truth dwells and patiently waits for recognition. I knew he had seen exactly what he said. Children don't lie about these specific, sensitive things. Children don't spontaneously invent such painfully specific details from absolute nothingness without basis in reality. I seriously thought about calling him, picking up the phone right there, in the middle of the silent, dark early morning, and confronting him directly. Is what June said true? Are you having an affair with your own sister? In our marital bed? In the house where our son sleeps innocently? The harsh words formed perfectly in my head, rehearsed and sharp as knives, but my physical hand couldn't reach the cell phone on the nightstand. It stayed there paralyzed in the dark, just a few centimeters away, but the phone seemed impossible to physically touch. Because part of me, that fundamentally cowardly part that still desperately wanted to believe in fairy tales and happy endings, still had a fragile, pathetic hope, naive hope, that if I didn't ask directly, if I didn't verbally confirm, maybe it wouldn't be objectively real. Maybe I could continue living in that somewhat comfortable, protective ignorance, in that false bubble of happy family illusion I had meticulously built with such care over 8 entire years of dedication. But another part of me, the rational part that was growing, quickly strengthening, taking decisive space, knew I desperately needed concrete, irrefutable proof. Simple word of a child only 6 years old against the articulate word of a manipulative adult. He would easily turn the situation in his favor. He would persuasively say June had dreamed vividly, that fertile childhood imagination created something that didn't exist in reality, that the boy said that fantasy to get attention because his father travels excessively. Or even worse, he would convincingly say Ji-won had only innocently slept on the living room sofa, and June confused everything naively. There would always be a plausible excuse, a convincing logical explanation, a manipulative way out. I absolutely needed something irrefutable and undeniable, impossible to deny or distort, something he couldn't in any way distort with smooth words and empty promises of change. In the cold early morning, when the sky gradually began to lighten with that pale, ghostly blue that mysteriously comes before true dawn, I finally got out of bed with growing determination. My legs trembled unsteadily, wobbly as if I had run an exhausting 42-kilometer marathon. But I walked with renewed determination to the large built-in closet where we kept old, rarely used things. Yellowed photo albums, boxes of Christmas decorations, obsolete electronic equipment we no longer used but kept out of attachment. I grabbed the small old camera from the dusty bottom of a forgotten box, that simple, cheap digital camera, a technologically outdated 5-year-old model that we used exclusively to record June's birthdays, school parties, wobbly first steps when he was only 1 year old, and strategically left it on his nightstand, meticulously positioned behind a stack of 3 books he was reading, calculatedly, and directly pointed at the bed, at a perfect angle that would capture everything. My heart beat so strong and so violently, so high and so fast, that I had absolute, paranoid certainty that I would wake June sleeping peacefully in the next room with the deafening noise of my growing internal panic. But miraculously, the house remained in sepulchral silence, a silent accomplice to my growing pain and the trap I was methodically preparing. I meticulously tested the angle at least 10 times obsessively. I adjusted the position millimetrically so it would be completely invisible and imperceptible, but capture absolutely everything that happened. I carefully configured it to automatically record as soon as it detected any movement in the room. My hands sweated profusely, trembled uncontrollably like leaves in a strong wind. Part of me, that part that still loved blindly and unconditionally, wanted to give up immediately, throw that revealing camera out the high window, pretend none of this was happening, go back to the warm bed and sleep deeply until I completely forgot. But the other firm part, the one that was tired of constantly pretending, of smiling when I wanted to scream, of accepting humiliating crumbs, falsely calling it true love, continued methodically and determinedly. It carefully checked the battery, cleaned the foggy lens, tested the recording, watched the test, deleted the test, left everything absolutely ready and prepared. 3 days later, on gray, rainy Tuesday, I traveled to Seoul for important work. It was a potentially important, transformative project for my stagnant career. A crucial meeting with a big, influential client, a market-leading cosmetics company that wanted to completely renew all corporate visual identity, and I had been selectively chosen among dozens and dozens of talented candidates. I should have been genuinely happy, excited, positively nervous, and energized, but I could barely minimally concentrate. On the express bullet train that quickly cut through the Korean landscape, I stared fixedly out the window without really seeing anything that passed quickly. The majestic mountains covered in morning mist, the dark, long tunnels, the small, picturesque towns with their traditional crowded houses, everything mixed into a gray, indefinite, meaningless blur. My disturbed mind was 200 kilometers away, in Incheon, on that strategically hidden camera, in that silent apartment where my son slept innocently, and my husband, perhaps at that exact moment, was betraying again. I slept terribly and restlessly at the hotel. It was an objectively good hotel, 4 stars in Gangnam, extremely comfortable king-size bed with expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, beautiful panoramic view of the Han River that shone romantically with the infinite lights of the gigantic city. But I lay there rigidly, completely rigid and tense, with my body physically present, but my soul on permanent, vigilant, maximum alert. Every vibration of the cell phone, and there were many constantly urgent work messages, annoying app notifications, literally made me jump startled in bed. Every notification was a violent shock, my heart racing thinking it was him or her or some devastating revelation. I imagined 1,000 different dramatic scenarios in my tormented head. I imagined arriving home and finding the camera discovered and destroyed. I imagined the video not recording due to cruel technical failure. I imagined discovering I was completely wrong, paranoid, crazy, and delusional. I created 1,000 elaborate excuses for them. I convinced and unconvinced myself hundreds of times during those interminable, torturous 48 hours. Maybe I really was crazy and paranoid. Maybe I was being paranoid without any reason. Maybe I should have blindly and unconditionally trusted, forgotten everything, thrown that revealing camera in the trash and mentally apologized for unjustly doubting. The important meeting on Wednesday was a complete, deeply embarrassing disaster. I presented the carefully prepared project. It was months and months of hard, dedicated work, dozens of different creative proposals, complex market studies, elaborate color tests, perfect mock-ups, but my voice came out trembling and weak, insecure, brittle as glass. I stammered on simple everyday words. I forgot basic technical terms I've used professionally for years. The marketing director, an intimidating woman in her early 40s with expensive designer glasses and an impeccable suit, frowned disapprovingly several times, asked direct, difficult questions I couldn't answer adequately, looked meaningfully at the assistant with that facial expression that says absolutely everything without words. In the embarrassing end, after an extremely embarrassing, humiliating hour, she said with a cold, fake professional smile that they would carefully analyze other options available in the competitive market. Polite but painful, clear translation. I had definitely lost the important client. 6 entire months of hard work thrown down the drain. I sat alone and defeated in the busy cafe next to the mirrored building, ordered an Americano that cooled completely without me taking a single sip, and for the first time in interminable days, I cried openly in public without caring. I cried simultaneously for the disastrous meeting, for the crumbling marriage, for myself who was progressively losing herself, for the difficult choices I would inevitably have to make soon. When I finally returned to Incheon on Thursday at noon, 2 days that seemed subjectively like 2 entire weeks later, the apartment was visibly different and disturbing, cleaner than the normal standard, too clean, with that artificial chemical smell of industrial cleaning product, trying to disguise something suspicious. The cushions on the beige fabric sofa were perfectly aligned in decreasing size order, something they never, absolutely never normally were. The clothes in the big closet were folded with military, obsessive precision that was neither mine nor his naturally. The wooden floor shone excessively as if freshly waxed. The sink was too dry, not a drop. The smell was also different and disturbing. There was a strong, penetrating floral perfume, too sweet, nauseating and artificial. Definitely not his, who always used that woody, discreet fragrance since we met years ago. It was unmistakably her perfume, Jiwon's. I recognized it immediately and viscerally, that expensive Chanel chant she used in annoying excess. It was everywhere oppressively, deeply impregnated in the air I breathed upon entering, in the bedsheets I touched, in the curtains, in my house, in my life, in my invaded sacred territory. There were other small but absolutely screaming signs for those who know how to look carefully. A different coffee cup in the sink, white stamped with delicate pink flowers. Definitely not our monochrome minimalist collection. A small golden earring, golden hoop-shaped, fallen on the bedroom's wooden floor under the heavy dresser. Long black hair strands in the metal shower drain. My hair is brown and relatively short, shoulder length. A red lipstick forgotten on the edge of the bathroom sink. Expensive brand. Every tiny detail was a painful needle in the heart, a progressive, painful confirmation of what I already knew intuitively, but refused to completely and consciously accept. I put June to bed that night with extra, prolonged care, intentionally extending our sacred ritual. It was our sacred, precious moment. Relaxing, warm bath with colorful floating rubber toys, the Pororo pajamas he loved wearing, careful toothbrushing with the silly, fun song we creatively invented together. I patiently read the usual story, that illustrated children's book, about a brave tiger and a clever rabbit he loved, and we already knew absolutely by heart, word for memorized word. "One more time, Mom," he insisted with those big, sleepy but insistent, irresistible eyes, and I obediently read again, intentionally slower, and again, even slower and emotionally, my voice catching on certain touching parts, deliberately postponing the inevitable, terrifying moment when I would have to face the brutal truth recorded on that hidden camera. I affectionately kissed his soft, warm forehead, deeply inhaled that unique, comforting smell of chamomile children's shampoo and pure innocence, and closed the bedroom door with extreme care, as if any noise could irreparably break that last fragile moment of illusory normalcy. Afterwards, I sat alone on the completely dark living room sofa. I didn't turn on the lights purposely. Only the weak yellowish light coming from the kitchen minimally and weakly illuminated the shadowy environment. The apartment was too silent, that specific type of oppressive silence that physically presses on the ears. I could clearly hear the monotonous ticking of the round clock on the wall, the constant annoying hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of cars down on the busy street, my own increasingly accelerated, irregular, shallow breathing. With trembling cold hands despite the internal heat, I picked up the camera from the nightstand where I had strategically left it 3 days ago. My fingers sweated so much and so profusely, so excessively, that I almost disastrously dropped the device on the floor twice. The small screen blinked when it finally turned on, and there it was, revealingly. The exact date, the precise time, the perfect angle of our marital bed perfectly technically framed. For a long second that seemed subjectively like a frozen eternity, I seriously considered turning everything off immediately, pressing delete, permanently erasing without watching a single revealing frame, pretending none of this was happening, returning to protective ignorance. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to see with my own eyes. I desperately needed the complete truth, no matter how painful and destroying it inevitably was. The recording started empty, silent, and monotonous. The image was shaky and imperfect, slightly out of focus, with that somewhat grainy quality characteristic of old, cheap, technologically outdated cameras. The weak yellowish light from the nightstand lamp gave a nostalgic sepia tone to the recorded scene, as if it were an old, deteriorated film. For almost an entire hour of monotonous recording, absolutely nothing happened. Just the bed empty and perfectly carefully made, the pillows symmetrically aligned, the analog clock on the wall implacably and inexorably marking the time that never returns. I mechanically sped up the playback, those static images passing in double, triple, quadruple speed. And then, at exactly 10:37 p.m., I will never, absolutely never forget this specific striking time. It's permanently burned in my traumatized memory forever. The bedroom door slowly and revealingly opened. He entered first, obviously, tall and familiar, wearing that light blue dress shirt I myself had carefully and lovingly ironed with a hot iron before traveling, folded the sleeves the way he aesthetically likes. My stomach violently and instantly turned, acid rising, burning up my tight throat. Behind him, she inevitably. Jiwon, my sister-in-law, my husband's sister. The woman who called me Ayani with such false affection, who said she loved me like a blood sister, whom I had naively welcomed into my home and my trusting heart. She wore a navy blue dress I recognized immediately and painfully. It had been my gift, bought with my hard-earned money for her 28th birthday, just 4 months ago. It cost 200,000 won I could barely comfortably spend. My heart squeezed so violently and painfully that I truly and sincerely thought I would faint right there immediately, fall from the sofa directly onto the hard floor, and hit my head on the sharp corner of the glass coffee table. My breathing was completely trapped and blocked in my throat, impeded, and for a long, terrifying moment I thought I would violently vomit the little I had eaten all day, but I couldn't take my eyes off the revealing screen. I was hypnotized and paralyzed, trapped. It was like watching Horrified a car accident in super detailed slow motion, absolutely horrible and nauseating, disturbing, but completely impossible to ignore or turn away my traumatized gaze. They laughed out loud and naturally. They laughed carelessly, as if absolutely nothing about this was wrong or immoral, as if systematically betraying, constantly lying and destroying families was the most natural, perfectly acceptable thing in the world. I saw him close the door with his bare foot, without letting go of her thin waist for even a single second. I saw her carelessly throw the expensive bag on the wooden floor, a red, ostentatious Louis Vuitton bag that Sung-ho had given her 6 months ago. Affectionate gift from brother to dear sister, he had explained when I questioned the absurd, disproportionate price. It cost 2 expensive million won. I had thought it very strange at the time, expensive and too intimate for normal siblings, but I didn't say anything verbally. I swallowed the growing strangeness and pretended it was perfectly normal. He hugged her in that specific, unmistakable way, the way that was exclusively mine by right, that should be sacred, and only mine. The big familiar hands in the places he knew perfectly and intimately, intimate, private places. The sound of her laughter, that light, crystalline, musical laugh, of someone I blindly and unconditionally trusted, of someone I opened my home and heart to without reservations, now sounded like a sharp knife being slowly and intentionally and painfully buried in my defenseless back. She touched his face with an obvious, unmistakable intimacy that only comes from constant, habitual repetition, from firmly established custom, from routine shared over time. That definitely wasn't new or recent. It wasn't an isolated, unique error, a momentary impulsive slip, a single lapse of moral judgment. It was a well-established, consolidated routine. It was a complete, complex, parallel life they had methodically and carefully built on top of my pathetic naivety and ridiculous innocence. I saw her whisper something intimate and provocative in his ear, very physically close. He appreciatively laughed, that deep, grave laugh I used to find sexy and attractive when we dated happily, when we were still genuinely happy and in love. Now it sounded absolutely disgusting and repulsive. I saw him kiss her exposed neck, very slowly and sensually, that specific, characteristic way he exclusively did with me at the beginning of our relationship, in the first passionate months of dating, as he hadn't done any more for years. How many years exactly? 3? 4? 5? The bed squeaked loudly and unmistakably, that familiar noise I knew so well and intimately, and I watched horrified what absolutely no woman should ever have to see in life. I saw him kiss her with real hunger, with genuine desire, with that intensity that was once exclusively mine but hadn't been for so long. I saw her hands, those same hands that helped wash dishes in my sink, on places on his body that should be mine, and only mine by marital right. I saw my entire built life, 8 entire years of dedicated marriage, being methodically destroyed in cheap digital video, painful frame by frame, interminable, torturous second by second. I abruptly paused the recording. I couldn't anymore. I physically couldn't watch anymore without collapsing. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, as if I had an extremely high fever. I stayed there, completely still and frozen, immobile in time and space, staring fixedly at absolute nothingness. The big television was completely off, black reflective screen, but I saw my ghostly, deformed reflection in it, an unrecognizable, strange woman, pale as paper, with sunken, red, swollen eyes, who definitely wasn't me. Who was that broken person? Certainly not me. I was always strong. I always was. I was always confident and determined. I was loved and valued by my husband. But the woman in that distorted, ghostly reflection seemed so small and insignificant, so broken and shattered, so completely lost and irreversibly destroyed. The rain began to persistently fall outside the closed window, first weak and timid, just a few shy, isolated drops softly hitting the glass, then strong and growing, rapidly intensifying, and then violent, furious, and relentless, as if the entire immense sky was crying along with me empathetically, sharing my cosmic, universal pain. The loud, monotonous sound of drops insistently and rhythmically beating on the window mixed perfectly with my broken, irregular breathing, completely irregular and shallow, with the involuntary, uncontrolled sobs I swallowed with superhuman force and conscious effort not to wake June sleeping peacefully in the next room, innocent and completely oblivious to the total destruction of our nuclear family. I didn't cry immediately, not in that initial paralyzed moment. I couldn't physically. Crying would be accepting as real and definitive. It would make everything concrete and irreversible. It would be admitting out loud that everything had completely and irretrievably ended. I just breathed mechanically, in and out automatically, in and out forcedly, trying not to faint right there. And I forcedly let the video continue rolling inexorably. I forced my eyes to watch until the end. I saw absolutely everything without exception, every torturous recorded second. I saw them in my bed, the bed we chose together animatedly, that we proudly paid for in 12 installments. I saw the way she laughed between kisses, how she touched him with absolute ownership, how he whispered things in her ear I couldn't clearly hear but could perfectly imagine from context. I saw when they finally stopped exhausted, satisfied and fulfilled, and stayed there lying side by side comfortably, talking softly and laughing intimately. I couldn't hear exactly what they specifically said. The old cheap camera didn't have good quality audio, but I saw perfectly from the obvious lip movements, from the intimate, familiar gestures, from the revealing body language. Deep, established intimacy. Complicity built over time. Genuine love? Maybe. Or maybe just intense animal desire mixed with the forbidden, perverse excitement of systemic betrayal. I saw when she finally got up from the bed, completely without any clothing, and went to the bathroom with absolute proprietary naturalness, how she walked through my house with ease, through my private space, as if she were the legitimate owner and not a criminal invader, how she came back after long minutes, and they nestled together intimately like an established couple, romantically embraced and intertwined, until they slept deeply and peacefully. I let the video run until the bitter, devastating end, until they slept embraced and intertwined in my violated bed, until total darkness took over the screen when the camera automatically turned off due to lack of battery, until absolutely nothing more remained of me except an immense, cavernous void, dark and infinite, that seemed to voraciously consume everything I was or had been. When the video definitively finally ended, displaying only a blue screen with end of recording, the apartment was plunged in absolute, heavy, oppressive silence. Even the violent rain had completely stopped. I mechanically looked at the digital clock on the DVD player, 3:17 in the morning. I had watched almost 3 complete hours of torturous recording, 3 exhausting hours of my life that I will never, ever be able to recover or completely forget. 3 hours passively watching my marriage, my entire family, my carefully built life, disintegrate rawly frame by frame on the cold screen of a cheap camera. Have you ever felt the ground literally disappear without taking a single step? Have you ever viscerally felt that absolutely everything you fought hard for, everything you lived intensely for, everything you generously sacrificed for, was a complete lie? If so, please tell me in the comments. I desperately need to know I wasn't the only one. I need to know there are other women out there, courageous survivors, who went through this and miraculously managed, against all statistical odds, to breathe again even when it seemed completely impossible and hopeless. In the following interminable, torturous days, I moved through the house like a transparent, silent ghost. I woke up on autopilot, prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs for June the way he likes them, toast with organic strawberry jam, fresh orange juice, with completely automatic, robotic movements, soulless. I took him to school holding hands, smiled politely and forcefully at the other mothers at the door, pretended with convincing perfection that everything was absolutely normal and calm. "How are you doing?" one would politely ask. Fine, thank God. And you? I would automatically respond. Total rush, right? But we're managing and surviving day by day. Superficial, empty, meaningless conversations that filled the inevitable awkward silence, but definitely didn't remotely fill the growing, consuming void inside me. I mechanically and thoughtlessly washed the lunch dishes, looking out the kitchen window, seeing life outside on the street continue normally as if absolutely nothing had fundamentally changed in the universe. The hurrying delivery man, the elderly bent woman who swept the sidewalk every day religiously at the exact same time, the uniformed teenagers who noisily returned from school talking loudly about trivial matters, everyone living their perfectly normal, happy lives, while mine silently and invisibly collapsed. I wore the fake smile like someone wearing a mask that's too tight, but absolutely necessary to survive socially. Inside, only absolute silence. A deafening silence that ironically screamed louder than any possible sound. June constantly asked me if I was okay, with that frightening, accurate intuition of sensitive small children. "Is Mom sad again today?" he would say with worried eyes too big for that small, innocent little face. And I would lie, without hesitating, always automatically denying, no, it was just accumulated tiredness. It was just stressful work. Mom was just temporarily tired. "Do you want a giant bear hug?" he would generously offer, opening his thin little arms. And I would hug him, maybe too tightly hurting, and cry silently inside that innocent, pure hug, strategically hiding my face in his soft hair, where he couldn't see my constant tears. And he, so innocent and blindly trusting, accepted all my weak, transparent excuses, because children trust adults unconditionally, and that blind trust broke me even more deeply than I was already broken. He finally returned on Thursday afternoon, after 4 complete days away. Xiong-ho, my legal official husband, the man who had solemnly promised to love me in joy and deep sadness, in vigorous health and debilitating illness, until inevitable death separated us forever. Promises are so absurdly easy to make lightly, so terribly easy to break without genuine remorse. He arrived with that perfectly rehearsed normalcy from years and years of consistent practice. He opened the door with the key, dropped the black travel suitcase in the entrance hall. "I'm home," he announced loudly as he always ritually did. That empty domestic ritual, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just systematically betrayed wife and son. He even brought flowers, white lilies, huge and fragrant, my favorites he remembered from years ago when he paid attention, as if beautiful flowers could magically erase months or years of systematic, cruel betrayal. As if a 20,001 bouquet from the expensive florist compensated for everything. He talked animatedly about work, about how the educational conference was extremely productive and enriching, about all the revolutionary new teaching methods he learned and was eager to apply in the classroom. "You should have come with me this time. It would have been great for you," he said, falsely smiling. "It was really very interesting and professionally enriching." The blatant, cruel hypocrisy disgusted me to the depths of my soul. He casually kissed my face with those lying lips that had kissed another woman, his own consanguineous sister. I felt his familiar smell, the familiar deodorant he'd used for years, but there was something else subtly mixed, a weak remnant of that nauseating floral perfume that now completely turned my stomach and made me nauseous. And I really looked at him, fixedly, intensely, as if for the first time in my life. I saw the small wrinkles around his tired eyes, some silver-gray streaks in the previously completely black hair, the 2-day unshaven beard, a complete stranger. When exactly did the man I loved so intensely become an unrecognizable stranger? I realized in that moment of sudden clarity that love sometimes dies long before we consciously notice its absence. It dies slowly, imperceptibly, gradually, cell by cell, until absolutely nothing remains except an empty habit. And we pathetically continue pretending it's still alive and pulsing, obsessively caring for a cold, inanimate corpse, and mistakenly calling it a healthy relationship. I had done exactly that pathetically for months or years. How many wasted, lost months? How many precious years did I spend meticulously caring for something that was already completely finished, dead, and putrefied? We had dinner together that horrible night. He, I, June. A perfectly normal domestic scene from the outside to observers. He told funny stories from the conference. June laughed with genuine pleasure, asked for chocolate ice cream dessert. I remained in heavy, oppressive silence, just mechanically pushing food from one side of the plate to the other, without eating absolutely anything. "You're strangely quiet even today," Seung-ho commented, with obvious false concern. "Something wrong happened? Everything okay?" "Just accumulated tiredness," I responded automatically without looking at him. Always tiredness. The perfect universal excuse that always worked. I patiently waited for him to sleep deeply. We stayed in bed together, he reading something on his cell phone, probably lovingly talking with her again, while I pretended to read a book I didn't absorb a single word from for hours. The digital clock marked midnight and 15 minutes when I finally heard his breathing become heavy, regular, and deep. The deep sleep of the innocent, or of the guilty without any heavy conscience and without remorse. I got out of bed with extreme care, like a silent, furtive thief in my own house. Every minimal creak of the wooden floorboards sounded absurdly too loud in the absolute silence. I silently went to the closet, carefully picked up a small suitcase, the one he always used for short work trips, and began methodically and systematically to put all his things inside without exception. Shirts, folded with contained violent anger, pants, underwear, socks, boring pedagogy books, the blue toothbrush, the expensive watch I gave him on our second happy anniversary, when we were still foolish and happy and innocent. Each piece was a memory being definitively packed, a piece of our history being violently put out without ceremony. I was completely methodical, systematic, and organized. I separated absolutely everything that was his without exception. All the clothes, the shoes, the tedious books, even the expensive specific shampoo he used and ordered online monthly. I filled 2 large suitcases, 3 heavy supermarket bags. I left everything strategically at the door, right at the main entrance, completely impossible to ignore or not see. A considerable pile of belongings that represented 8 entire years of marriage, cruelly reduced to common baggage, without sentimental value. The next day, when he woke up in the morning and saw all that threateningly accumulated, his face instantly turned white as paper. The color literally disappeared, completely drained, leaving only that pale, grayish, cadaverous tone of someone who saw a terrifying ghost. "What is all this?" he asked with a voice still hoarse from sleep, but already with a perceptible, growing tremor of genuine fear. I didn't respond with useless words. Words would be insufficient and inadequate. I just firmly picked up the camera from the nightstand, turned it on with firm, determined hands, and pressed play directly on the revealing main scene. I saw the blood literally disappear from his face while he watched completely motionless and paralyzed. I saw the exact precise moment when he realized he had been completely discovered, undeniably caught, that there was no longer any possibility of effectively lying. His pupils visibly dilated with terror, his jaw slightly dropped in shock, his hands began to tremble violently, uncontrollably. He instinctively tried to turn off the revealing camera, but I firmly held his wrist with force. "No, you're going to watch absolutely everything until the end, every torturous second." And he forcedly watched, forced to see what he did, who he barbarously betrayed, how he systematically destroyed everything. When the video finally ended, the silence was absolutely sepulchral and suffocating. Even June, who normally woke up very early, was still sleeping deeply unconscious, as if the entire universe conspired for that moment to be exclusively our confrontation. He desperately tried to explain. Of course he tried. Men always desperately try to explain the completely inexplicable, justify the absolutely unjustifiable with twisted logic. "I can explain everything," he began with a broken, desperate, pathetic voice. "Please, it's not exactly what you think. I swear to God." But what did I think? That I had clearly seen, with my own eyes, him brutally betraying me with his own consanguineous sister? It was a terrible, unique mistake, he continued rapidly, and in a rush, words coming out completely rushed and incoherent. A moment of inexplicable weakness. She was so emotionally vulnerable, so alone and depressed after the difficult, traumatic divorce, and I just wanted to console her as a brother, be a present, supportive brother, and things just happened without control. Things just happened, as if betrayal were an inevitable cosmic accident, something completely outside human control, as if he had accidentally tripped and fallen inside her repeatedly, for 2 entire years. It wasn't exactly what it seemed in the video, he pathetically and desperately insisted. I laughed bitterly. For the first time in interminable days, I laughed. A completely dry, bitter laugh, without a drop of genuine humor. A laugh that sounded more like a painful sob, like fine glass breaking into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't what it seemed. My voice came out low, dangerously controlled and cold as ice. I saw clearly, Seung-ho. I saw with my own eyes. Don't tell me it wasn't what it seemed when I saw exactly, precisely what it was without ambiguity. I saw you kiss her passionately. I saw you lay her in our sacred marital bed. I saw you do with her everything you haven't done with me in years. He tried to physically approach me, but I instinctively took a protective step back. Don't ever touch me again. Never lay a hand on me. The voice came out firmer now, surprisingly strong and resolute. I saw tears form and shine pathetically in his eyes. Tears of what exactly? Genuine remorse? Or just selfish fear of losing the comfortable life he cynically built on my naive back? Please, please, I beg you, he pathetically begged on his knees. And the sight of an adult man 6 feet tall begging on his knees should give me some satisfaction, but it only caused deep, visceral disgust. Think about June. We're a family. He desperately needs his father present. Did you think about June when you were having sex with your sister in the bed next to the room where he slept innocently? Did you think about our family when you repeatedly and systematically chose her instead of me for 2 years? He had no answer, because there was no answer that would minimally justify it. Exactly how long? I asked coldly. I needed to know everything completely. I needed the complete, total pain, not half or fragments. Exactly how long has this been happening? He hesitated long and visibly, and I instantly knew it would be much worse than I already imagined in the worst scenario. 2 complete years, he whispered weakly and defeated. 2 entire years. 2 complete years. While I dedicatedly took care of the house, the child, worked hard, waited patiently and faithfully, while I constantly blamed myself for not being interesting enough, sexy enough, good enough, for not being able to keep my husband interested and sexually satisfied. While I emotionally shattered trying to be perfect for him, he was systematically with her enjoying. 2 complete years of elaborate lies, 2 years of calculated systematic betrayal, 2 precious years of my life wasted and thrown away in a marriage that was a complete pathetic farce. It was in my face the whole time blatantly, I realized aloud, the devastating realization falling like an atomic bomb. You laughed at me secretly, every time she came here, every family dinner, every holiday celebrating together. You looked at me and secretly laughed inside at the idiot, didn't you? The idiotic, pathetic, blind wife who didn't notice anything obvious. No, he vehemently denied, almost desperately screaming. We never laughed at you. I love you deeply. I've always loved you deeply since I met you. Don't say that sacred word, I cut coldly and harshly. You absolutely don't know what that word means. True love doesn't do this. Love doesn't systematically betray for years. Love doesn't constantly and compulsively lie. Love doesn't deliberately destroy families. The recorded images don't objectively lie. Human love? Yes. Love blatantly lies all the time conveniently. Says it's forever when it's temporary and convenient. Says it's exclusive when it's freely shared. Says it's true when it's just convenient and selfish. When he finally left, and I physically made him leave, I didn't accept even 1 more minute of him in that house in our violated sacred space. The sound of the door heavily closing was the definitive final period I desperately needed to hear. It was the end of a painful chapter that should have ended long ago, but before definitively leaving, he tried to manipulate one last time. What about Ji-won? Are you going to tell her too? My work? My conservative family? Destroy my reputation? I laughed bitterly again. That broken, joyless laugh. You still selfishly worry about her primarily, even after absolutely everything? I picked up my cell phone. She already knows everything. I sent her the complete video early this morning, and to your conservative, judgmental parents, and to your school's demanding principal. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of man you really are underneath the mask. I saw pure panic growing in his eyes. The reputation carefully built over years, the stable job, the respectable family, all crumbling simultaneously and spectacularly. Good. Let it all collapse violently. Let him feel a fraction of the devastating pain he gratuitously caused. After he definitively left carrying the suitcases, I sat collapsed on the cold, hard corridor floor, and finally cried truly and deeply. I cried uncontrollably for hours on end, until I had no more physical tears to shed. I cried simultaneously for the naive woman I was, for the marriage I lost, for the irreparably broken family, but I also cried with deep, liberating relief, because finally, I could completely stop constantly pretending. The restart wasn't easy at all. Nobody tells you this honestly. Everyone talks about inspiring overcoming, about gloriously rising from the ashes, about magnificently freeing yourself, as if it were a perfectly linear, beautiful process. But it's absolutely nothing like that. It's chaotic. It's extremely painful. It's confusing and disorienting. Nobody honestly talks about the endless sleepless nights, about waking up at 3 a.m. feeling the physical weight of a ghost next to you in bed. Nobody talks about the sudden panic attacks at the supermarket when you see apparently happy couples. Nobody talks about how painfully difficult it is to explain to your innocent 6-year-old son why his father doesn't live here anymore, why there won't be happy family dinners anymore. June asked painful questions I didn't know how to answer adequately. "Doesn't Daddy love me anymore?" he would ask with hurt eyes. "Why doesn't Auntie come here anymore? Was it all my fault?" That last question completely broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I immediately knelt in front of him, held that small, innocent little face with both hands and said emphatically, "Never. It was never your fault at all. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Daddy and Mommy have complicated adult problems you don't understand. But we two, you and I, we're going to be okay eventually." I started professional therapy. A kind, experienced psychologist named Dr. Kim, with an office near Gangnam. She was a wise woman in her 50s, with a calm, comforting voice and understanding eyes that had clearly seen much human pain and suffering throughout her career. Expensive sessions that made my bank account scream painfully, 150,000 won per full hour. But that literally saved me in ways I can't completely describe with adequate words. The first session was extremely difficult and painful. I sat in that too comfortable armchair, and when she gently and professionally asked, "What brings you here today?" I completely and spectacularly collapsed. I cried so much and so intensely that she had to give me an entire box of soft tissues. I told absolutely everything without filter. June's 10 devastating words, the strategically hidden camera, the horrible, traumatizing video, the systematic 2-year betrayal. She listened in complete, respectful silence, without interrupting me once, without judging me at all. I spent entire months patiently relearning to breathe normally. Mornings were the absolutely worst and most difficult. Waking up, and for one precious second, completely forgetting, and then violently remembering, and feeling the weight fall devastatingly again like tons of bricks. I walked alone along the banks of the Han River, watching the gray, opaque water. One day, I was sitting alone on a bench watching the sun rise slowly, and I surprisingly realized there was still pulsing life in me. The pain didn't completely kill me. It fundamentally transformed me. June grew rapidly, returned to genuinely laughing. I gradually learned to cook alone, to sleep without paralyzing fear, to look at myself in the mirror without devastating guilt. People said time heals everything, but it's not passive time. It's the active courage to continue daily. Have you ever started over from absolute zero? If you have, comment "I did it" below. I want to feel your inspiring strength. It took me a long time to forgive, but I eventually forgave. Not for him, for myself. Because carrying hate is like drinking poison expecting the other person to die. He moved on with his life. She moved on with hers. I heard they didn't stay together. Whoever cheats with you eventually cheats on you. It always happens. Me, my life was never the same again. And thank goodness. I learned that love isn't what we give, it's what we accept to receive with dignity. Sometimes I still remember that fateful night, but now there's gratitude mixed with the scar. That's where I stopped being a passive spectator of my own life. Today, the apartment is physically the same, but the air is light and free. June sings songs while I prepare dinner. There are no hidden cameras or oppressive, uncomfortable silences. "Mom, are you happy?" he asks innocently. I genuinely smile for real. Yes, June. Now I really am. In Korea, I learned that even the coldest winter holds a spring. He left me empty, but the emptiness was where I truly found myself. Have you ever loved someone who destroyed you little by little? If you have, tell me sincerely. Sometimes, life breaks us just to see if we're still capable of getting up. And we always are. Always. If this story deeply touched you, stay here with me. Leave a heart in the comments, because here, we feel. We rebuild ourselves, together always, and always remember, You don't need anyone's approval to feel sufficient. You already are. You always have been from always.